Taxation is the price we pay for failing to build a civilized society. The higher the tax level, the greater the failure. A centrally planned totalitarian state represents a complete defeat for the civilized world, while a totally voluntary society represents its ultimate success. Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone. Today we have Larken Rose, the author of The Most Dangerous Superstition, mandatory reading for anyone interested in understanding the world around them, and Mark Passio of What on Earth is Happening. Absolutely must see his seminar titled Natural Law. First question to Mark Passio. Mark, what is freedom?
I would say that freedom is a state whereby individuals can exercise their rights unrestrained from coercion and or the initiation of aggression through coercion, and that is the natural state of humanity. Humanity should be living in the state whereby our rights are not constrained or basically we are threatened by the initiation of physical force, duress, coercion for the exercise of rights, which are actions that do not initiate harm to other sentient beings. So that to me is the state of true freedom.
Larken Rose, what is freedom?
Pretty much what he said. I think, people often confuse the notion of, well, I should be free to have a house and do this and do that and do the other thing. And they don't realize that liberty is actually, and rights are sort of a negative concept. It doesn't mean you have the right to fly to the moon. Like, well, you have the right to have nobody else forcibly stop you from flying to the moon, but you have to find a way to fly to the moon if you want to fly to the moon. So freedom doesn't mean I can do whatever I want. It means other people aren't forcibly interfering with me doing whatever I can inside what I want, inside the bounds of I'm not restricting other people.
So Larken, when you say, do I have a right to do something, what we're really saying is a person morally justified in doing an action insofar as it doesn't initiate fraud or aggression? Anything more specific on what a right is that you want to pinpoint?
Well, just that it's the negative. To say I have a right to speak my mind just means nobody else should forcibly stop me from speaking my mind. I mean, if I'm alone on an island, what does it mean to have the right to freedom of speech? Kind of nothing, because there's nobody else there who could possibly forcibly interfere. It's just a statement of a negative. To say I have a right to X just means if I choose to do X, nobody should violently intervene to try to stop me. That's all it means.
Mark Passio, what is a right?
A right is an action that does not initiate harm against another sentient being. It's a very simple definition, and as Larken already pointed out, that is a negative definition. You'll notice that I didn't go on a spree of listing rights, okay? I said a right is an action. First of all, that's what all rights are. Rights are actions. They're things that people can do and should be able to do unrestrained. But we're defining a right in the negative, as Larken said, okay? It is an action that does not initiate harm to other sentient beings. So anything that doesn't do that falls within the boundaries of a human right. And it's a very short list of what the harmful behaviors are that do initiate harm against other sentient beings. And that's murder, assault, rape, theft, trespass, coercion, willfully lying. Those are the seven, what I call the true seven deadly sins, the seven transgressions against natural law, the seven transgressions against other beings' inherent rights.
Mark, what is natural law?
Natural law is a set of unchangeable, non-man-made, binding, and immutable conditions that ultimately govern the consequences of the behaviors that those who have the capacity for holistic intelligence choose through their free will. So I consider it the karmic force. I consider it the spiritual laws in the universe that ultimately govern whether whole societies of beings, of intelligent beings, live either free or live enslaved. It governs what I call the law of freedom, that as the morality of a group of people increases, they become more free, and as the morality of a group of people declines or degrades, they become more enslaved. That is how natural law functions, essentially to give us the consequences of our freely chosen behaviors.
Larkin, what are your thoughts on natural law and whether or not you think morality is objective? There is a right way for human beings to interact with one another.
Yeah, if morality isn't objective, then it isn't anything. If everybody's opinion is equally valid on the topic, then it's literally meaningless. Like if the serial killer who thinks it's okay to butcher and eat his neighbors, if that's just as accurate a moral view as the people who say you shouldn't do that, then it's meaningless. I don't usually use the term natural law, but I talk about the same concept using different terminology all over the place. And it's about how people should behave. It is a moral should. It isn't, it's not something you create or generate or, legislate into existence. It's just a description of here is what is when it comes to right and wrong. And of course, there are different opinions, and gray areas, and people think, well, I think this is bad and this is good. But that's us trying to figure out the natural law, not trying to invent it. It's like people still argue about science and have this theory and that theory. It's still a matter of figuring out what we are supposed to be and how we're supposed to behave. And, the obvious parts are like, don't attack people and don't rob them. And then people can get to gray areas and stuff. But natural law to me is just a term that defines how are people supposed to behave? And the number one glaring in your face rule is don't aggress against others.
Larkin, what is government and why are you anti-government?
Government is the notion that certain political rituals, whether it's elections or appointments or whatever else, can actually bestow upon a select group of human beings the right to rule. It's not just about the ability to control. Lots of people, if they have a gun, might have the ability to control their neighbor by force. That doesn't make them government. Government is the exercise of authority, meaning the right to rule, which never actually exists. The right is imagined. The thugs are real, the guns are real, the violence is very real, all too real, but the right to do it, the authority to do it, is always a lie. So the problem is not the thing over there called government. It is the fact that people view it as government, as a thing that actually has the right to coercively control us. And that's why I talk about the fact that those people and their guns are not actually the problem. The belief system and people imagining that there is such thing as a legitimate, rightful ruling class, that is the problem.
Mark, what is government and why do you not support the legitimacy of government or a state?
Government is a false and illusory religious belief. I would go even further and say that government is a cult. It is a cult belief system because the definition of a cult is a religious belief that is actually harmful to members that are not its believers or adherents. And the basic belief structure of those who believe in government is that there is such a thing called authority that is vested in man, and that is entirely rooted in the concept of violence, which is the initiation of harmful behavior toward other beings that are exercising their rights because of the commands or demands of a ruling class that call themselves the legislators or lawmakers that want to impose their will violently upon other beings, coercively, violently upon other beings, and therefore restrain their rights. That's what government is to me. And ultimately, if you really take what I just said there and condense it down, it comes down to three simple words. Government is slavery.
Mark, what is anarchism?
Anarchism simply is the state by which there are no rulers over other people. There are no masters and there are no slaves. The word anarchism is actually derived from two Greek words. The prefix a or an in Greek simply means without or the absence of. And the noun archos, archon in Greek means ruler or master in the actual connotative sense of being an owner of other people, like a slave owner, a king who rules over its subjects, a master in that sense, not someone who has come to a very level of advanced knowledge and is therefore called a master of some skill set or something like that. The connotation of the word archos or archon in Greek means a master over a slave or a king who is above his subjects. So if you put those two root words together, an and archon, where we get anarchy from, it simply means the absence of rulers or masters. And therefore, that means that there are no masters and no slaves, and that is called the state of freedom.
Larken, what is anarchism?
Well, he just gave a perfect definition of anarchy. Anarchism is the advocacy of that. To me, it's even sort of silly and funny that there need to be such words. Like, there is not a word that means someone who doesn't believe in Santa Claus. There is not a word that means someone who doesn't advocate killing and eating his neighbors. Like, government and authoritarianism and statism is insane and immoral, but because it's so rampant, there needs to be a term that means I'm one of the people who doesn't want somebody to violently dominate you. I think the day will come, and I don't even think it's all that far in the future, when nobody will use the word because it will literally describe everybody, because everyone will have outgrown this superstition. But for now, being an anarchist literally just means I don't want a ruler for me and I don't want a ruler for you. I want you to be actually free. And to me, that's just sort of the step one of being a decent human being. I don't even see it as some, outlandish philosophy. It's just like how to be civilized 101.
You have this great quote in your book: if human beings are so careless, stupid, and malicious that they cannot be trusted to do the right thing on their own, how would the situation be improved by taking a subset of those very same careless, stupid, and malicious human beings and giving them societal permission to forcibly control all the others? Excellent point in the most dangerous superstition. Mark Passio, what is gun control?
A gun control is the restraint by the ruling class and or their enforcers to coercively and violently restrain the natural inherent right of self-defense with firearms from the people who they consider that they have the right to rule over. And it is a coercive, violent behavior because it actually initiates harm against someone else's property, namely their right of self-defense.
Larken, help us get through this euphemism here. What does gun control really mean? We have Justin Trudeau yesterday saying that I hereby declare all military-grade weapons illegal. Of course, not for the state, a monopoly for the state. Larken, what does gun control really mean? Help us get to the heart of it.
Almost everything that government does, it uses euphemisms for, and it dishonestly describes. Gun control is a shining example. It's this nice sounding, oh, we're sort of limiting something scary or something. It is, the accurate term is basically peasant disarmament. It's the ruling class, because they never apply it to themselves. It's the ruling class saying, and even this skips part of it, you're not allowed to have guns at all, or certain kinds of guns. And by not allowed to, they mean if we catch you doing this, we will send men with guns to come capture you for disobeying us. So gun control is literally a form of gun violence, immoral in every way, because it is 100% aggression and immoral to tell someone for merely possessing that thing, I and my thugs with their guns am going to come, capture and cage you. It's the irony is that what is called gun control is literally a vicious, immoral example of gun violence.
Mark Passio has an excellent video called The True Meaning and Purpose of the Second Amendment. Mark, I'm curious, why do you oppose gun control? Isn't it just about helping people and making sure we as a society are safe and cooperative?
Not at all. It's about creating a power differential between the ruling class and the rest of the people. And that's what government always seeks to do, to enhance its own power at the cost of the average individual and their rights and freedom. I'm opposed to it because I understand that each individual has the inherent right to defend themselves from coercion and violence, so long as they are not initiating harm against another sentient being. And what gun control is, as Larken said, is the initiation of violence by the people who are doing the bidding of the ruling class to actually, conduct violence against peaceful people simply for owning a piece of equipment. If an individual doesn't have the right to perform an action, the action cannot be delegated or granted to any other individual or group, and thereby magically turn a wrongdoing into a right. There is no such thing as the delegation of a wrong, So if an individual would not have the right to go and seize forcibly and coercively and violently someone else's property, that right cannot be granted to any other individual or group of people and then called a right. See, we all have the same natural inherent rights, and included in those same natural inherent rights that each individual has, and no one has any more or less than anyone else, is the right to defend your physical self, your physical being, your property, your rights, and your freedom from the initiation of aggression by others.
Now, Larken, how can you not support gun control? For heaven's sake, the U.S. is this gun-toting place, and that's why there's so much gun violence, 30,000 a year. Larken, how can you seriously oppose gun control?
First of all, because it is gun violence, like I explained before, and I oppose people using guns for bad things. So much of the way statists think and voters think and the way government functions is like a teacher and little kids. Like the teacher saying, well, you little kids, when you're in my classroom, you're not allowed to have guns. You're not allowed to do this. Like, we're grown-ups. The notion that a politician should A, have a whole bunch of armed guards himself, and then B, should tell the rest of us, you're not allowed to have what my thugs have every day and will use on you if you disobey me, because you're just kids and it's too scary, it's too risky, you're too unstable. For anyone to accept that view is basically for them to accept the fact that they're either a helpless child or a slave or both. And gun control is completely founded on the notion that the masters have the right to decide for us what we are allowed to possess in order to defend ourselves from criminals, from invaders, or from the master himself. And at the end of the day, that is the only reason they ever push gun control, because if you had human livestock, would you want it to have guns?
Mark Passio, do you not care about the thousands of Americans who die at the hands of gun violence?
Just because someone else initiates harm or aggression doesn't mean that other people lose their rights as a result. This is totally flawed logic that is often put out there by people who are advocates of ridiculous forms of violence like gun control. I would advocate that people learn how to defend themselves against the initiation of violence instead of trying to limit people from doing that. It's the idea that, if, let's say, a lion attacks a gazelle and they did it with teeth, that then you disarm and take all the teeth out of the gazelle so they have no ability to even bite their aggressor. That's what gun control is the equivalent of. It's basically saying, because there are bad people who might do violent things with firearms, let's take them away from the people and let them lose their ability to possibly defend themselves from such attacks. It's completely and utterly flawed logic. And again, as we've pointed out over and over again, it is a form of violence with guns, which we firmly stand against.
Exactly. And the 30,000 annually statistic is, first of all, a lie, because half of those are suicides. It's not violence if you do it to yourself, any more than me spending my own money is stealing from myself. And also, a lot of those are gang related. And government is the number one cause of mafias and gangs, because they outlaw things like gambling, drugs, prostitution, drive them underground. Just as there's no Al Capone today being violent with alcohol, there wouldn't be any if there wasn't a government pushing a drug war or any of these black markets. Larken Rose, is there any other important message you would like to communicate about gun control you feel is not generally understood?
Well, I think there really is a trained-in immaturity to a lot of people. Now, in the U.S., there are a lot of exceptions to this. There are a lot of people in the U.S. who do take it upon themselves to realize, hey, I'm just as responsible as anybody else. If there's some scary person out there, why would I sit on my butt and hope authority saves the day? If I have a gun, if I have the means and the ability to go stop the bad guy, it's just as much my job as anybody else's. But But there are also so many people in the country who have this immature notion that if we just sit tight and wait for authority to save us and protect us and tell us what we're allowed to have and what we're like, everything will turn out fine. And first of all, those people need to read a damn history book. But second of all, they literally need to grow up. People who believe in government literally need to grow up and realize this is the real world. There's you, there's other people, we're in this together, so to speak. And if you want yourself to be defended by somebody with a gun, which you do if you dial 911, here's a thought. Have somebody with a gun already be at your house by having it be you. And the fact that so few people even think about that and realize that if you're going to cheer for the forcible protection of the innocent, why don't you just be one of the people who do that? You don't need a badge. You don't need a special authority. You need to grow up and be moral and responsible.
Another way they lie with statistics is saying, well, in 1996, Australia had a gun ban and, you know, everything went fine. Violence has decreased. What they don't tell you is the 7 years prior, gun violence was also on the fall. And they use a 7-year period from about 96 to 2003. Violence in Australia fell about 22%. In the US, in that same 7-year period, gun violence fell 29%. So this is how the world was just, for whatever reason, you can't say that was as a causal result of the gun confiscation bill. So that's why it's so important to not hear a statistic, go do a bunch of research, and then find out that the person was just using it as a stalling tactic. We got to get down to the principles. Mark, and one other thing. It's like, does government not also kill innocent people with guns? I mean, every criticism of, well, but innocent people will die if civilians have guns. Have governments ever killed civilians? I don't know. Eric Garner, Waco, World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, King Leopold. Like, there's all these examples. Mark Passio, final thoughts on gun control.
Those who advocate for gun control are advocates of violence. And people never really look at it that way. They think that they're doing the right thing, but what they are actually saying is, we believe that a special class of people who magically have more rights than other people do have the right to come and coercively and violently suppress other people's rights with gun violence. I mean, imagine that. You know, that's what the people who are advocates of gun control actually believe, and yet still believe that they are good people, quote unquote. They're advocates of violence.
Yeah. Now, Mark, you have been very critical of the police. However, I guess no one's told you that they're just doing their job and they don't make the laws. Congress makes the laws, for heaven's sake. Mark, why are you so critical of police when they don't make the laws and they're just doing their job?
Well, the SS, the Schutzstaffel, the highest levels of the Nazi Wehrmacht and High Command in Nazi Germany, also issued orders, and they, the people who were undergoing war crimes tribunals at Nuremberg offered that same excuse, the Nuremberg defense, and it didn't work there because there is no excuse for following immoral orders. If someone is commanding you and saying we're giving you an order to go and suppress someone else's natural rights through coercion and violence, the answer is you have to say no and or quit that job. See, I don't really believe that there is any use or reason for police forces to exist because I believe in total personal responsibility. That means that each individual should take it upon themselves for their own defense because no one is closer to your own body than you. First of all, it is impossible for someone else to actually engage in self-defense for another individual because you can never get there faster than the individual themselves. This is one of the first and foremost principles of all martial arts, including self-defense with firearms. So I don't think that we should try to give any group of people a special select group of rights that we say that other people don't possess, because as soon as you do that, you're creating a differential in power, and that's always going to be abused by people who are flawed human beings. And it's a fundamentally flawed axiomatic idea from the very beginning, from Jump Street. That is a flawed axiomatic idea to say anyone else should be personally responsible for your self-defense. No, you need to be personally responsible for your self-defense and learn self-defense techniques through martial arts and the usage of firearms.
Larken, are the police responsible for enforcing immoral laws?
Absolutely. And as much as I talk about how voters and advocates of government think like children, that is even more true of cops and enforcers. The ironic thing is they pretend to be, we're the tough, rugged bad guys keeping you. They are physically and intellectually the most immature people there are. Because when you challenge them and say, you're doing something immoral, they say, I'm just doing what I'm told. It's like a little kid in classroom. The teacher told me to do this, so I'm doing it. And, you know, I can't be expected to have a conscience or a brain or the ability to distinguish right from wrong or take responsibility for what I am personally doing. It really is the most cowardly and evil thing anybody can do, to give away their own judgment and conscience and free will and blindly obey some imaginary outside authority. And that's what cops and soldiers are.
And of course, they would never extend that courtesy to you. Yes, officer, I was dealing drugs, but this is my job. My Pablo Escobar boss told me to do this, so go lobby him to change his policy of selling things. Don't cage me. I'm just doing my job. I'm just a hired assassin. I'm just a hired bank robber and house invader. It's so obvious. Once you apply the principle that they pretend to believe in consistently, you see they don't apply it anywhere in their own life. Mark Passio, I was reading David Schmitz, a philosopher at the University of Arizona, and he says freedom, classical liberalism, libertarianism means the ability to say no. How do you respond, Mark?
100% absolutely agreed. I'm a huge studier of esoteric philosophy and the occult, as many people who know my background and my work would know. And the word no is actually referred to as the lost word in the occult science and art of Freemasonry. And that is the word of all power, as far as I'm concerned. See, that is the ability to basically tell an aggressor, I'm not going to tolerate this form of coercion, violence, or aggression against my natural rights, my freedom, my property, etc. And you have to be able to say no with teeth. You can't just use it as a word and expect people who are psychopathic in their mindset and hell-bent on committing violent acts to just hear the word no and go, oh, okay, I guess you're right, I'll back down. You know, saying no with teeth means you have to always maintain the ability to defend yourself with physical force. And again, that is done in the modern world through the equalizer known as firearms. I would also say you could say no with teeth through some form of personal self-defense in the form of martial arts as well, which I also practice and study. But firearms are so important when it comes to equalizing a potential huge discrepancy in physical power. You know, like for instance, a very thin woman versus a 260-pound huge muscled man. So absolutely, I say that everyone really has to have the ability to say no with teeth. And that is part of preserving our inherent right of self-defense, especially with firearms.
So, Larken, what I hear from this is saying no is saying, no, I don't want to be part of society. No, I don't want to do anything for anyone else. Is freedom, is this a philosophy of being selfish, Larken?
Not in the slightest. Well, unless you mean selfish in the good sense of it is my responsibility to take care of myself, and like not, I don't care what happens to anybody else, but I'm in charge of me and I'm responsible for my actions. But I think when it comes to the notion of saying no, this discussion just reminded me of many years ago. I wrote a little flyer thing that was titled "Stop Saying Please," and it was about how so many people, the closest thing they get to saying no to authoritarian control freaks is asking them nicely to please give us permission to have a little bit more freedom. And so the whole article of Stop Saying Please was about stop telling these people that it's their choice what you are allowed to do, which you do when you vote or you petition or when you do anything other than saying, no, I'm not going along with this. I will disobey. I will resist. I don't care what your laws say. I don't care what your legislation says. I don't care what the majority says. I don't care what anything else says. I say no. And yes, that is absolutely a lost art or whatever you want to call it in so many people, because even so many people who say they believe in freedom spend so much of their time asking the politicians to please give us their legislative permission to be a little bit more free. If you are asking somebody else for your freedom, you're not even free inside your own head.
It's pretty incredible. They've gotten the philosophy of peace and non-aggression to mean selfishness. Meanwhile, their philosophy is you have to obey our edicts because we wrote them down and voted. And if you don't, we're going to cage you and shoot you if you resist. Mark Passio.
If I may add a quick addendum to that, saying no, I mean, the very first, as far as I'm concerned, of all human rights is the right to be left alone and the right to refuse participation in something. Imagine someone saying you must do this thing and you not being allowed to say no. That is called slavery. To command another person and compel their behavior is to make the claim that you are the master over their body, and that's called slavery. So, of course, saying no to participation in anything that government or anyone else in society, for that matter, wants you to do isn't selfish. It's a natural right to do so.
Mark, when I hear the ideas of anarchism, it sounds like this utopian pipe dream that just assumes everyone is fine and everyone is a good moral person. How do you respond?
Well, the very word utopia means nowhere. So the concept of utopia doesn't mean a wonderful place. It means that it is an illusion that does not exist anywhere. That's literally what is meant by utopia. So, there is no such thing as a place that is going to be free of any suffering, of any negativity, of any uncomfortableness. Okay, there is that is a pipe dream. Okay, claiming that people should. Saying that we know that people should interact with each other on a volunteer basis, free from coercion and the initiation of violence, isn't saying that that will create a perfect world immediately. It is saying that by continuing the cult belief system of government, which is slavery, that you are ensuring that violence continues unabated. You are ensuring that you are never going to work toward a world that has less violence in it and more freedom in it. But anarchists are in no way claiming that just creating a society whereby there are no masters and no slaves will be a perfect place. There will still be problems, there will still be human struggles, and there will still be suffering in the world in many different forms, just not in the form that we've created a structured society that is a hierarchically based society based on masters who have many more rights than their slaves, which they can just dictate whatever their rights happen to be at any given time. That's all anarchists are saying. We're not saying that it will create any sort of a perfect, peaceful place.
It's the great non sequitur. It's like saying things are imperfect in nature. Therefore, the Church of Scientology has the right to coercively rule hundreds of millions of people. Well, how do you know that will lead to more problems? They don't have the right either way in the first place. Larken Rose, anarchism is utopian and relies on everyone being a perfectly knowledgeable, perfectly kind person. How do you respond?
It's very weird that anybody thinks this, and they only think that because they actually haven't thought about it. They just feel it because it's an uncomfortable, unfamiliar idea to them to live in a society without a ruling class. The accusation that it's utopian and that'll never work, and the advocacy of government is the same as saying we will never have a world without murder, therefore let us advocate a limited amount of murder. Now, I oppose all murder. Is that utopian? No, it's called being moral. Does it mean that I think we will actually have a world without murder? No, it doesn't. It means that's what I advocate. So for somebody to say that it's utopian to oppose all initiation of violence, but somehow it isn't to advocate the initiation of violence and to give certain people power over everybody else, as if there could be anything more ridiculously pipe dreamish than saying, we're going to give these people permission to control and rob the rest of us, and I'm sure they'll do it for our own good, and thinking that will end well. As Mark said, none of us are saying this makes a perfect world. It does remove the biggest problem in the world, which right now is the thing that believers of government advocate and they push for and they make it happen. And then when you say that big monstrosity is creating evil and suffering like way beyond anything else, they say, well, without it, it would be even worse. And they say that 100% as a result of indoctrination and 0% as a result of actual evidence and logic.
It's incredible. You were once debating someone, Larken, and it was Tom Willicott, and he was so flabbergasted. He goes, "Look, I just don't trust people." And you go, "What species do you want running government?" And it was so terrific. And yeah, just take that and apply it consistently. People are evil except on the second Tuesday in November when they vote. We need to have voting. Democracy is inherently good. So they don't even hold this consistently. Mark Passio, I would embrace the ideas of anarchism, but I am so worried about the poor. Government currently helps the poor. In the absence of government, the poor might not be helped. Mark, how do you respond?
This is essentially the advocacy of theft, because to say that someone must contribute any amount of the product of their labor, but through coercion, is to make a claim on the product of the labor of that being. And by doing so, you are indirectly making a claim on that which produced that product of labor, which is the body itself. So once again, anyone advocating for taxation, redistribution of wealth, taking from the rich to give to the poor, etc., is advocating for theft. If something is not done voluntarily, it is done only through coercion and duress, which is violence in and of itself. So all we are here advocating here today, Keith, is that we don't want people to initiate violence to others just to get done in the world what they think should get done. If it gets done, it has to get done on a voluntary basis. And, you know, for people who have such a dark worldview of other people that don't think if people kept more of the product of their labor that they would be more charitable, they really haven't really studied the dynamic or the data at all. They just have a belief system about it. And really, that's all that the government really is in any of its forms or in any of its decrees or enactments or the ways that it does things. It is a religious institution. And that's how people have to really start seeing government. They need to see it as a religion, no different than any other religion, except for the fact that it's actually more violent and has even caused more death through democide than almost any other religious institution on the face of the earth.
Larken Rose, I care about the poor, and that's why I don't embrace libertarianism or anarchism. Larken, how do you respond?
There's so many people who just, they know what they know. They know the life they're in, what they're familiar, what they've seen, and they have a hard time imagining or predicting things otherwise. So literally, if you stuck them in a cage and gave them a bowl of gruel every day and kept them that way for 10 years, and somebody opened the cage door, some of them would say, how do I know there's going to be food out there? Like, I have my bowl of gruel, I have my roof over my head, not a great roof, but a roof, because that's all they've seen. And so government will use that to control something and then say, without us, this wouldn't be the case. So if you look at the Soviet Union, you know, they can say, you wouldn't have any food if not for us. You have to stand in bread lines and maybe get a little bit of moldy garbage after a few hours, but without us, you wouldn't have any. Well, that lie doesn't work in the US because we have supermarkets and you can go there and buy all sorts of food. But government is always trying to take over areas of society and then tell us this wouldn't happen without us. Never mind that, you know, when it comes to the poor, in spite of being robbed by the ruling class, Americans are ridiculously generous to the tunes of billions of dollars a year. And all of the taxation and regulation that gets in the way of helping people have places to live and food and everything, it's just a matter of government literally interfering with us voluntarily finding solutions and then saying, see, this is why we can't have a voluntary society, because you couldn't solve these. Never mind, they are the reason they can't be voluntarily solved right now, because agents of the state with guns will stop you from solving it and then say, that's why you need us.
Mark, don't we need to have at least some government to protect consumers and to protect employees, maybe protect employers sometimes from foreign competition? Don't we need some sort of base societal protection? Mark, how do you respond?
I mean, that's basically the argument of saying, don't we need some slavery to keep society moving in any one particular direction? All government is immoral because it is the idea that certain people have the right to issue commands to other people, and that those other people have some sort of a moral obligation to follow the commands of this dictatorial ruling class. On its face, this is the major paradigm shift that people have to make. And this is actually a spiritual shift in consciousness, believe it or not, is to understand that the concept of government is on its face inherently immoral, because the entirety of the concept of the institution is based upon coercion, violence, and keeping people in the state known as duress, which is the state of threat of violence. This is how government generally rules, is through threat of violence. You know, how much people say, oh, there's less violence in the world today than there ever was. Physically, that may be the case, but guess what? There's probably more duress. There is more threat of violence if there is not compliance with government decrees than at any other time in the world. See, the people who are advocating for all of these things, even minarchism, are ultimately advocates of coercion, violence, and duress. And we have to keep going back to that simple concept. And they cannot argue a different position if they actually are honest about what the behaviors that they advocate are. If you actually put their feet to the fire and say, please explain to me what this behavior would ultimately have to look like in the physical 3D world, they would describe a situation where enforcers or armed individuals come and command the compliance with the decrees of their political overlord masters. There is no way around it for them logically. They would have to explain it like that if they're being honest with themselves. So that's what I say to all minarchists and those who advocate just for keeping government as a, you know, a protectorate or something of that nature. It's still claiming that you can give rights that the individual does not possess. If none of us have $1,000 to give to anyone, we cannot all come together and give the non-existent $1,000 to anyone else. Rights cannot be conferred, granted, or, you know, transacted to other individuals if those who are making the claim that they're doing that don't have that right themselves. So if we look at what people would say they want to keep government for, even in a minarchist terminology, in a minarchist point of view, if they don't have the right to do those things individually, they cannot be granted to anyone else to do and magically call it a right when in fact it is a wrongdoing based in violence.
Larken, don't we need government for consumer regulation, employee regulation, and some foundation societal structure?
When people say, well, we still need government for this, whatever it is, whatever they finish that sentence with, what they're saying is, well, in this case, we need to have some people committing violent aggression in a way that the rest of us have no right to do. We need some people to not be bound by morality, basically. They're allowed to be violent thugs. And whatever the problem, whether you're talking about, you know, poverty or consumer protectionism or the environment or yada, 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 whatever it is, including real problems, the notion that the answer is to tell somebody, you get to make a decision, come up with a plan, and violently impose it on the rest of us in a way that none of us have the right to do, as if that's going to make it better, is a perfect example of why I say advocates of government are immature in their minds. It's literally a matter of, we're not sure how we would handle this, so we want big daddy government or big mommy government handling it because we're not sure what it would look like otherwise. But to jump to saying, well, this is why we need government, is literally saying this is why we need to add immoral, violent aggression into society just for this thing over here, just to take care of the poor or to protect us from this. No, we don't. In no case do we need to, nor should we, add immoral violence into society. And that is all that the belief in government adds, is the impression that violent aggression can sometimes be legitimate. And I don't mean defensive force, I mean aggression against innocents. Government, the belief in government relies entirely on the notion that that can be legitimate to initiate violence against somebody who didn't do anything to you. No, we don't need that insanity.
Now, most societies today have governments, pretty much everyone I could think of. Most throughout history have also had governments. Larken, why is this so hard for anarchists to accept?
I fully accept that societies have believed in this insane thing, and history books will show the death tolls from them believing in it. To me, we are just about to see the beginning of real humanity, because this is a combination of sort of intellectual laziness and cowardice, along with intentional brainwashing and manipulation and propaganda from like literally sociopaths and control freaks who have indeed duped most of the people throughout most of the world into thinking that they need to be ruled by somebody else. Basically, they need to be owned by a wise master who will take care of them. The fact that we have believed something stupid for a very long time is not a reason we should keep believing something stupid. And the fact that evil things have been happening for a very long time, like slavery, is not a reason we should keep doing evil things. And when somebody falls back on the argument of, well, this is how it's been forever, it shows me they are literally just clinging to what is familiar instead of thinking at all about logic or morality or anything of the sort. So if somebody wants to predict, well, there's going to be government forever, okay, you can predict that. If you are advocating violent, immoral aggression, which you are if you believe in government, don't use the excuse of, oh, well, it's always been around, any more than, you know, a murderer can say, oh, you might not like murder, but I mean, murder's always been around, so it's okay if I do it. No, it isn't. If you predict it, it's that one thing. That's one thing. If you condone it, you are an accessory to evil.
Mark, governments have always existed throughout history. They exist everywhere now. How do you respond?
Well, of course, because people have generally, since the dawn of human civilization, fallen for the mind control that authority is somehow morally legitimate. As anarchists, we understand that authority is a morally illegitimate position. The belief in authority can never be moral, because what you are saying is that there is a set of people, a class of individuals that actually have some sort of a, quote, moral right to issue commands to other people, you know, and that's basically rulership. All government is and ever has been is a euphemism for godhood, kingship. See, we used to put this idea of the vesting of authority in one individual, and they were called the pharaoh, the king, the ruler. Okay. And, you know, now we've just diffused that concept of authority into a group of people, an oligarchical class of people that we call government. You know, it's no different. It's before it was the king or the pharaoh or the ruler was the representation of God on earth and can command the people to do whatever he commands them to do, and they must obey, which is called slavery. Okay. All we've done in the modern world today to justify the quote unquote moral existence of government, which there's nothing moral whatsoever to do with it. It's completely an immoral position to even believe in. Okay. Is we've taken that and we've done a process of osmosis. We've diffused this concept of authority. Instead of vesting it in one individual, we've diffused it into thousands of individuals throughout society that we call government or the authorities. And it's always been a cult. It's always been violent. It's always been immoral at any other time in human history. It still is today, and it always will be for as long as people believe in it. It's simply an immoral, violent cult. And that is the spiritual awakening that actually needs to happen in humanity, that is what government is, always has been and always will be until we become truly moral individuals and truly responsible individuals and abolish this form of slavery.
Yeah, and of course it's a violent cult. I mean, just imagine, I would just love to have a hidden camera and tell my parents about a fake group I joined and then just describe government. I'm like, yeah, we force parents to have their kids attend his sermons, and the parents, we threaten to take their houses away if they don't chip in for our group. And we have to blindly obey whatever the leader says and tells us to do. They'd be like, oh my God, this is terrible. Expose this man. And well, that is openly what governments do all the time. Now, as far as naming names, who was in power, we have people like Bush Sr., David Rockefeller, Zbigniew Brzezinski, John McCain. They've died this year, and government somehow hasn't shrunk, which tells me that the problem is not the rulers, it is the mind of those who believe in the illegitimacy of government. Larken, how do we help people escape mind control and the belief in government?
Well, it's funny because that question pretty much defined my life for the past quarter of a century, is how to help people get out of the belief in government. I think it's important to note, and Amanda and I teach a course called Candles in the Dark, which shows how to do this very gently and non-confrontationally. I also do it very confrontationally in other settings, in outright knockdown, drag out debates. But what's really important to note is that people are not inherently statists and we have to make them into something else. People are inherently voluntarists or anarchists. And on top of that, there's this layer of indoctrination that has convinced them that we need a ruling class and it's legitimate and we have to obey and yada, yada, yada. And so it really is a matter of freeing the person underneath rather than making them into something else. We don't even have to teach them much that they don't already know to get them to see that they're indoctrinated in belief to authority. It goes against their conscience. It goes against what they know to be true about right and wrong. And there are a bunch of different ways to try to help people see that and to try to free them from it. But the reason I have so much hope is this isn't a matter of there's a bunch of evil people and we have to talk them into being good. There are a bunch of deceived people and we need to help them escape the deception, and that's it. And then we just let them be free. Like, the goal isn't, now I'm your master, now you will believe what I say and do as I say. The goal is to free them from other people's propaganda and literally mind control.
Exactly. It's not enough to say, well, government has the power because they have military and guns. Well, you have to explain why the military takes orders from them and not that group or me. I've been calling Doug Ducey, countless times, telling him to obey me and do what I say, but he only listens to Trump. Well, obviously, because in his mind, one is legitimate and the other is just some peasant. Mark Passio, how do we help people escape mind control?
Well, I think you have to really meticulously and in a stepwise progression point out the logical inconsistencies in their thinking. People think they're advocating for a moral position because that's all the government does is obfuscate its behaviors through euphemisms and false equivalencies and tells people that it's actually, operating the way that it does for moral reasons, which is never actually true. So one of the processes that I do is like a Socratic method, and basically say, you consider yourself a moral, do you consider yourself a moral individual, and, and explain what you think should be done regarding taxation. And then the person might say, well, I think, the rich should be taxed this much, people who don't make this much should be taxed this much. And then I'll say, okay, do you think you yourself have the ability to go and forcibly confiscate any percentage of wealth from anyone or resources from anyone that you think? Could you break down their door, go into their home, confiscate wealth, confiscate money, etc.? Do you have that right? No, they'll always admit, no, I don't. Why? Because you're a moral person. You don't believe in committing violence or aggression or theft against your fellow, human beings. And they'll say, yes, that's true. Okay. And then when you explain, well, do you think if you don't have that right, that you could tell your next door neighbor to go and do that? Could you command them to do that or give them the right to do that? No. So then you take it out to a next logical stepwise progression. Well, please tell me who does have that right. to go in and break down their door and confiscate whatever wealth you see fit, to redistribute it as you see fit. And if they're being honest with themselves from a moral point of view, they will admit no one on earth has that right as an individual. And then if you continue the logical progression, well, then if no one on earth has the right to perform that behavior because it is inherently violent and immoral, how could anyone who does not possess that right come together and claim that they are magically gifting or granting that quote unquote right, which is actually an immoral wrongdoing, to any other individual or group of individuals? And I've done this many times with many people. And if they're being honest with themselves, if they're not lying directly to themselves or looking you in the face and just blatantly lying about what is true, okay, and about how they feel that they are a moral individual, they will acknowledge that that cannot be done in actual point of fact, natural reality. You can only make the claim, or you can only believe that that can be done. And that's all government is. It's a false, immoral belief system which constitutes a religious cult. And it's slavery. That's it. And if you really get down to explaining it in a stepwise moral progression and keep consistently appealing to the individual morality of the human being, they will have no choice but to admit that what they are actually advocating for is violent behavior. And I've done this to a few people, and when they finally said, yes, I have to admit that's really what it is in actual nature and actual behavior, I said, well, congratulations, you actually understand now the philosophical position of the anarchist who advocates for no violent behavior in society, for only voluntary behavior in society that is consensual, mutually consensual. And many people have actually thanked me for doing that, and many people have walked away with, kind of a little bit of hard feelings because they got their ego damaged a little bit as a result of the exchange. But either way, you've planted a seed that cannot be unplanted.
Exactly. Yeah, I see anarchism not only as freedom, but also genuine equality under natural law. If I don't have the right to do it, I don't have the right to grant it to someone else. And I am equal to them. That's why they don't have the right to initiate aggression against me, and I don't have the right to initiate it against them. That's how we know that voluntarism is natural law, because it's the only philosophy that could be consistently argued without appealing to anything arbitrary. A few more questions for you, gentlemen. I appreciate your time here. Larken, how do we discern right behavior from wrong behavior, moral from immoral?
This is something that I don't usually talk about in depth in public, because most people on most things have a whole lot of agreement on all the major things that matter. Like if I ask somebody, is it okay to beat up your neighbor and take his stuff? Everybody says, well, no. That tells me that something inside them, however it works, their conscience, their moral judgment already knows enough that peaceful coexistence is perfectly easy between me and them if they don't believe in government. And so I think the quest for what are we supposed to do, there are gray areas that we can still debate about, and I debate a bunch of voluntarists about them. But when it comes to the main huge things of, is it okay to attack somebody else and take their stuff, most people already instinctively and internally know that's not okay. And that's true of Christians, it's true of Jews, it's true of atheists, it's true of Muslims, it's true of people all over the place, it's true of people all over the world who never even heard of those religions, who live off in the middle of nowhere. They have still, they have that built-in sense that we're not supposed to be killing and robbing each other. And just that all by itself, even if people didn't sit around having deep philosophical conversations, just that basic instinct of right and wrong is enough to make the world 1,000 times better than it is if the belief in authority goes away. Then we can bicker about gray areas and where you draw this line, where you draw that line. But when it comes to the basics of being a moral human being, almost everybody has enough already built into them, hardwired into them, that I don't even feel the need to bring up those discussions to most people. Because if not for their belief in government, we would get along just fine.
Mark, how do we discern right behavior from wrong behavior, moral from immoral?
I think this is probably the real crux of the argument, because what we're talking about here and have been talking about from the very inception is morality. Anarchism is about the understanding of objective morality, ultimately. And it's very important to get it right. And this is where, we use the word right to mean correct, but it also means moral, because they're ultimately the same thing. That which is true and correct is going to lead us to that which is moral. So it's very important to be correct, to be right about it. Okay. So you have to start with the definition of what a right is. And most people can't do that. Most people cannot accurately, correctly give the definition of a human right. And that's why we're losing our rights. Because if you can't properly define something, you don't really understand what it is. So you'll never understand that it's actually being taken away or you're losing it. A right is a behavior. It is an action that a human being can perform that does not initiate harm to another sentient being. That means it doesn't aggress upon them violently. It doesn't coerce their rights. It doesn't coerce or restrain their freedom if they have not harmed another. Okay, and it doesn't harm their property. Okay, so you don't engage in behaviors which cause harm, which ultimately all the forms of behaviors that cause harm are forms of theft. We have to understand property versus theft. That's the ultimate moral question when it comes to the very crux and bottom line aspect of the moral nature of this argument, okay, of this philosophy. All the behaviors that are actual wrongdoings that we could ever commit against any other sentient beings are actually forms of theft. So murder is theft of life. That if the person was not engaged in a behavior that was causing harm to others and possibly putting their lives in danger through violence, then you don't have the right to take someone's life because their life was their property. So murder is the immoral taking of the property of another in the form of their life. Murder, assault. Assault is the taking of bodily well-being without right. So that's theft. Rape is the theft of free will sexual association without right. Yeah, there's never a right to do that. That's theft. You're taking someone's free will and freedom of association when they don't want to do that. So, coercion, you're taking someone's free will away. You're actually taking their freedom away through coercion. Okay. Trespass, you're taking security in their living space, in their domain in which they live and operate away. And lying is taking away the necessary information that they need to make informed decisions. So every immoral behavior is a form of theft. So really, if you really want to get down to the very crux of the moral argument that underlies all of it, it's you have to understand that which is not your property and don't take it through violence. That's it. Every form of wrongdoing is someone committing the theft of someone else's property, whether they're taking physical things that don't belong to them, whether they're taking rights that don't belong to them, whether they're taking freedom that doesn't belong to them, whether they're taking life that doesn't belong to them. All forms of immoral behavior is ultimately theft. So we can sum up all moral behavior and ultimately anarchy in one simple statement: don't steal. That's what ultimately all of the moral argument comes down to. Don't commit theft, because if you're not committing theft of things that do not belong to you, you're ultimately not doing immoral behaviors. And that's what we have to take it down to as an individual. Look at the behavior and look at, was property taken as a result of this behavior? And if it was, don't do that thing. That's a bad, wrong, and immoral thing to do. It's so simple, yet people have had the definitions of what is right and what is good and what is moral obfuscated. That's how evil works. It knows that people want to generally be good. It knows that they want to be moral, but it obfuscates the definitions so people can't ultimately come to the correct conclusions of what true morality, true objective morality really means. And that's how mind control works. That's how mind manipulation works. And that's ultimately what government is always seeking to do, to confuse true morality, replace it with morally subjective standards, and get people completely confused about what the true difference between moral right and immoral wrong ultimately is. And it's been very, very successful at doing that. And that's why anarchists and voluntarists have to come together and get on the same page about an understanding of human rights and human morals, and then really go out and teach that to other people. Then we'll be making some true headway.
Larken, Mark says truth is that which is, making it objective. Larken, how do we determine truth from falsehood?
Well, basically, like in any context, whether you're talking about morality or science or anything else, the individual is ultimately the one who has to make those decisions. And to make a decision that isn't just arbitrary and stupid, you have to observe and learn and bring in all the information and understanding you can. Now, the particular challenge when it comes to morality is you can't measure it with a tape measure and weigh it with a scale. You have to use your built-in conscience that is hardwired into you. And a lot of people do this, and they have all sorts of discussions, and they read this book and they learn about this and that and the other thing. So learning factual physical truth about something, it's a lot more straightforward of go gather direct evidence and figure out what's going on. Learning morality is a lot more about turning inward, because you have built into you the ability to sense right and wrong. You don't need to defer to some external authority, because if you're doing that, you're just flipping a coin. If you're going to say, well, I'm going to let that guy tell me what's right and what's wrong, well, 50-50 chance he'll be a psycho. And so it's something that requires internal reflection and requires looking to your own conscience, which, as it happens, is precisely what authority tells you not to do. Don't rely on your own conscience. Don't rely on your own thoughts and feelings about how we should behave and what should be going on. Just defer to those of us in power and let us tell you what you should and shouldn't do. We'll tell you what's legal, and then you'll get confused between legal and moral and start to think that what makes you a good person is blindly obeying us. And that is the complete opposite from the truth. And a thing I really want to throw in is that when I talk to some average person who says, well, I think we might need government for this, and they have, whether right, left, I don't care, wherever they are on the spectrum, I say, I don't even know you. I've never met you before. And I would much rather your actions be based upon your own conscience, even if that means ignoring the dictates of any political ruling class. Now, how weird would it be for me to trust your conscience more than you do when I've never even freaking met you before? But that is the case with a lot of people I talk to. And it puts them in a position of literally either saying, oh, okay, well, I appreciate it and thanks, or arguing in favor of them ignoring their own conscience, which is literally insane. But I like to do that to point out, I would rather everybody use their own conscience, as flawed and imperfect as it may be, instead of deferring to some imaginary external authority, because the vast majority of evil and injustice that has happened in the world was not the result of individual malice. It was the result of obedience and compliance with imaginary authorities.
Of course, and the most evil people in the world are, sucked in like a bat signal to the state, because that's where they can commit their atrocities without being held accountable. I mean, just imagine how many deaths Mao and Kissinger would have on their hands if no one believed in their legitimate authority. Mark Passio, you said truth is that which is. Mark, how do we determine truth from falsehood?
Well, as Larken said, it starts with observation. And that is the scientific methodology. So my ultimate answer is you apply the same investigative tools that we have through the scientific method. You observe, you formulate hypotheses based on that observation, then you do testing to see if it actually works that way, and then you refine it, and you then publish your results. It's no different than the actual scientific method, because what we are saying here is not a religious belief. It is not a belief system at all. It is what is actually operating in nature, So there are truth discovery methods that we already have at our disposal. In the modern day, we call this the scientific method. In the ancient world and in esoteric systems of thought, they referred to this as the trivium method. The trivium method was first taking in all of the data input that you require So that was the input phase. That was the knowledge phase. I'm sorry, the grammar phase. Okay. Then you had, you went to grammar, then logic. So this is the, boiling it all down. This is taking in all the different perspectives and weeding out logical inconsistencies. Okay. This is the refinement stage. And that was called logic. And this is the processing stage, if you want to look at it in modern terms. And then we have the output. This was rhetoric in the ancient trivium. And, this is actually putting out your findings to other people. When you understand how it works, it's knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Knowledge is gaining all of the different seemingly disparate parts of information. Okay. Then understandings, putting them all together and processing them correctly so that you know what it means. And then wisdom is what you do with it. It's going out into the world, it's explaining it, and then it's behaving rightly upon all of that understanding that you've garnered in the last two stages. So it's a stepwise progression. Once again, it's a stepwise logical progression, and it is a scientific methodology. It does not require any belief. We are not asking anyone to believe that this is true. We are asking people to investigate it. And again, when it comes to things like natural law, objective morality, these are things that just exist in nature. It is not up to us to invent them, make them up. It is for us to come to the accurate understanding of that which already exists. And the tools for doing that already exist. We just have to use them wisely and correctly.
Larken, what is the most important thing you've learned from talking to statists for 20 years, you say?
23, coming on 24.
Thank you for your service.
I have I have accidentally learned a whole bunch about psychology and how tightly people cling to a comfortable but false idea, something they've been taught to believe and something that has been, stuck in their brain for decades, and how uncomfortable and it is for them to question that, and how many very weird things the human mind does to cling to whatever is familiar and already believed, even in the face of evidence and logic that just demolish it. And so to me, 99% of the battle is not even explaining these concepts, because as you just heard from both of us, they're pretty dang simple and basic. Like, don't attack people. How hard is it to teach that? The reason it takes so much effort is because people were indoctrinated into a different belief that teaches that there needs to be a ruling class and that that's legitimate. And human psychology does so many weird gymnastics in order to avoid questioning whatever somebody already believes. And so that, for me, is the entire challenge. And it's what my project, The Mirror, is about. It's what our seminar, Candles in the Dark, is about. It's about learning to get through all the minefield of human psychology to the point where you can actually connect with the person, not to make them defer to you instead of defer to authority, but to make them defer to nobody, to let them actually accept and embrace their own self-ownership and their own individual responsibility, including the responsibility to determine right and wrong for themselves and to act accordingly. But yes, there are a lot of psychological obstacles to try to get the average person to do that, because they have been trained to believe that it is genuinely criminal and bad to be a grown-up who makes their own decision. Oh, you think you're above the law? Yes, we're all above the law. Stupid politician scribbles are beneath every single one of us. Our conscience in any given individual, that is all you have. You have your senses, you have your conscience. It is up to you to figure out true and false, right and wrong, and act accordingly. And there's a lot of resistance to that, because that's uncomfortable. Responsibility is uncomfortable. But I'm thrilled seeing the headway that's been happening just in recent years, of the number of people who have, coming from a bunch of different directions, crashed into the obvious truism that at the end of the day, I have to decide what I believe, and I have to decide what I think is true and what I'm going to do about it. And I can't defer that to anybody else. And that, unfortunately, is very hard to get people to embrace. But when they do, then they become actual free human beings.
And Mark, you gave your answer earlier with regard to how you used the Socratic method. I'm curious, Mark, when you were on InfoWars, you said some of the most important information you've ever come across was regarding Nikola Tesla energy suppression. What is the most important info you've come across researching Nikola Tesla's energy suppression?
I would say it's the simple concept that the control of energy is the control of human beings, and this is one of the ways that the ruling class control people. They control resources, they control energy, they control food, medication, etc. Things that people, require for physical survival. If a certain select group, an oligarchical group of human beings, can ultimately control those resources, you can hold people in a state of fear. A fear of lack, a fear of not having, a fear of being in a state of survival, you know, and that is one of the big methods that the ruling class use to hold people under their control. Fear leads to cowardice and inaction. And that's ultimately what they want. As Larkin said, they don't want people taking personal responsibility. They don't want people learning, how true science works. They don't want people learning how to grow their own food. They don't want people learning how to defend themselves. They want dependency. This is the biggest tool of government, is dependency. And one of the things I learned by dealing with people who are stuck on believing that that form of dependency is necessary and that government is necessary is the programmability of the human mind and the power of the ego. That's what it all led me to a very deep understanding of. And this is also, of course, as Larkin said, psychological understanding. This is all about the understanding of the human mind, because see, these manipulators, they know us better than we know ourselves, unfortunately, as a species. They know everything. That's what occult manipulation is all about. It's ancient psychology. They understand all the hidden workings of the human mind, of the human psyche, and they know how to exploit those workings. They know how to basically get inside that clockwork and exploit it to their ends. And if we learn how our minds work, how our psyches work, to the level that they understand it, that will level that playing field of knowledge, and they will not be able to manipulate us in those ways. Unfortunately, most people haven't gone that deep into psychological knowledge, unfortunately. We have to understand the human mind is very programmable. Garbage goes in, garbage comes out. And if good programming goes in the form of understanding how to think, understanding how to come to correct conclusions, critical thinking, and then we're going to have good output in the form of behavior, because we're going to come to the right conclusions about morality, and then we're going to behave accordingly. Conversely, if bad programming goes in, garbage belief systems that are rooted in violence and coercion and advocate slavery, then we're going to be totally confused about what's going on, both within ourselves and in our world. We're going to accept all kinds of euphemisms for things that we should never accept, like the government isn't violence and slavery. Then our output in the form of our behavior is just going to reinforce those incorrect beliefs. And we're going to get, as a society, negative consequences. This is how natural law ultimately works. If we put quality in, we come to the correct conclusions and therefore come to exercise correct behavior, we're going to get an orderly outcome and an outcome that does not generate self-inflicted suffering in our world and in our lives. And conversely, if we put garbage programming into ourselves, and then we're completely confused about what's true and good and right, and then our behavior is immoral, we're going to get very painful and high levels of suffering as an experience in our shared reality here on Earth.
Final question to both of you, starting with Larken. Say you are maybe just at a grocery store and you see Joe Biden claims nomination and someone says, that's crazy. What is your take on politics? What is your 30-second elevator pitch introduction to someone kind of interested but not really into the philosophical? Larken, what would you say to that person?
In short, the entire game, I don't believe the entire game. I don't want anyone to have the right to rule you, and I have no right to appoint somebody to rule you, and I certainly don't want anybody to rule me. They play this game, and we pay attention, and we choose between the lesser of two evils. I'm looking forward to a day when we stop playing the game, we stop falling for their lies, and we just run our own lives.
Mark Passio, how would you respond?
I actually have responded to some people that have come up and asked me what my politics are. And I say politics is an illusion of choice between two masters that would rule over you. And government is slavery. And that's it. It all comes down to that you have to just simply dispel those euphemisms and get people to understand that all the political game is a dialectic to get people to choose a master. And once they stop doing that, and once they realize that there is no legitimacy to some people being masters while other people are their slaves, then the world will make headroads into being truly free. And that's what we, as voluntarists, as anarchists, ultimately advocate for.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Larken Rose, is there anything that I didn't ask that you would like to be in sort of this introduction roundtable to anarchism? Anything I didn't bring up you'd like to?
Well, I like to harp on the fact that this is about freeing people from their own lies. And even as voluntarists, we need to keep that in our heads, that it's not, I'm going to defeat them, I'm going to, show them that they're wrong and I'm right. It is really a matter of showing them that they are right underneath the garbage they were taught. And we need to help them see that the garbage does not match what they really are, what they really believe in, and help them dare to throw off the garbage and, like I said, reclaim their own self-ownership and their own responsibility, not so they can blindly believe me or Mark or you or anybody else, but so they can actually function as independent, thinking, moral human beings.
Mark, is there anything I didn't ask that you'd like to communicate to the audience?
I mean, maybe the only thing that I would add as an addendum is, the power of the hold of the ego over the mind. And many people would consider this more of a spiritual topic. But the ego, as I see it, is really just the force that refuses to acknowledge that it was wrong. It's the thing that is deeply embedded in the human psyche that makes someone refuse to admit that they could have been wrong about something or that they could have been duped about something. And when we really do shadow work upon our own subconscious mind, and when we look deep inside of ourselves and what our belief systems are that we think are true, we have to come head to head up against that force of the ego that is out of control, that wants to constantly say, no, you're right, you're okay, just keep going, don't look into these things, don't acknowledge that you were wrong, and we have to actually try to really use the tools at our disposal to come to an accurate understanding versus what we previously believed was true. That's a very, very difficult spiritual process as far as I'm concerned. And that's why so few people want to do that type of shadow work of analysis, actually analyzing their own belief systems and what they feel and believe to be true, because that's it's a painful process. It's something that most people find very, very uncomfortable and painful, outright painful. And that's why so few people want to do it. But what we, as advocates of true freedom and a voluntary society, should be trying to help explain to them is a little bit of discomfort in the short term can result in a much better life in the long term if we're willing to go through that process of rediscovery of self.
Terrific. And as I mentioned at the beginning, please visit Mark Passio's website, whatonearthishappening.com. Larken Rose, as I mentioned, has the great book, The Most Dangerous Superstition. Larken, what is the website where you have the candles in the dark for people to purchase?
Just for that, it's called attendcandles.com, but we just recently launched a website called therosechannel.com that has that seminar, but also a couple videos we did just for the subscribers, and it'll have all of the past daily rants I've done. There are now hundreds of them, and basically a whole bunch of stuff we're making now that will be on therosechannel.com.
I mean, for God's sake, we spent 12 years in government schools. Let's give Larken like 6 hours of our time for something so special. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you to the viewers for watching Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone.